Maya Vance stared at the heavy industrial collar in her hands, the metal cold and biting against her skin. The engraving was partially scratched away, but the words, K9 Property Restricted, were still visible, a death sentence in the world of federal operations. This wasn't just a lost dog, this was a weapon that had walked out of a black site and straight into her life. If you believe loyalty is stronger than fear, hit that subscribe button right now. Stay with me until the very end, and comment below with the city you're watching from. Now, let's begin. Maya Vance sat at her kitchen table, her fingers tracing the edge of an old case file that shouldn't have been there. The silence of the house was heavy, a physical weight she'd been carrying since the bureau put her on temporary leave. A suspect lost, a partner injured, and a decision made half a second too late. It was a loop that played in her mind every time the wind rattled the windows. Just breathe, Maya, she whispered to the empty room. Just one more night. Then she heard it, a high, thin sound that didn't belong to the storm. It wasn't the ocean or the rain hitting the black rocks outside, it was a whimper. Maya was out the door before her brain could talk her out of it, her flashlight cutting a jagged path through the downpour. The beam swept across the sand until it caught a dark shape wedged between two jagged stones at the tide line. Please don't be a body, she muttered, her training overriding her exhaustion. It wasn't a human, but it was a casualty. A German shepherd lay there, his fur matted with grime and foul-smelling oil, his back leg twisted at a sickening angle. When the light hit his face, he didn't growl, he just opened one amber eye and looked at her with a quiet, exhausted acceptance. I can't do this, boy, Maya said, her voice shaking as the rain soaked her FBI jacket. I can't take on another soul I might lose. She turned back toward the house, her boots slipping on the slick rocks. But the dog let out a sound, a weak, breathless plea that felt more like a command. Maya stopped, her eyes squeezed shut. Damn it. She turned back, braced herself, and lifted him. He was solid beneath the weakness, his weight falling into her arms as if he had been waiting for her specifically. By the time she got him inside and laid him near the heater, her muscles were screaming. Let's see what they did to you, she whispered, grabbing a towel. As she wiped away the oil and dried blood, her hand hit something hard beneath the fur. It wasn't a normal pet collar, it was a heavy, industrial band. She cleaned the surface, her heart rate spiking as the words emerged, K9 Property Restricted. Shadow, she said, reading the name she decided on for him. Who are you? The dog didn't answer, but the house did. The lights flickered and died, plunging them into a silence so absolute it felt like an interrogation. Outside, through the rain-streaked glass, a pair of headlights swept across the beach, slow, searching, and deliberate. They're already here, Maya breathed, her hand moving toward her holster. The next morning, the storm had passed, but the air felt charged. A sharp, rhythmic knock hit the door just after noon. Maya opened it to find two men in civilian clothes that were too clean for a coastal town. Emily Carter, the taller man asked, his jaw tight enough to show a scar running to his chin. We're looking for a dog. Former K9. Big German shepherd. Maya didn't move an inch. Without a warrant or credentials, this conversation ended before you finished that sentence. The shorter man chuckled, his eyes scanning the room behind her. We're just asking questions, Agent. He's a restricted asset. Very expensive. Very dangerous. Shadow rose to his feet behind her, his ears twitching as he stared at the men with a tension that was unmistakable. He didn't bark, he just watched them as if he were memorizing their faces for later. You should leave, Maya said, her voice a low warning. Now. We'll be in touch, the tall man replied, his gaze lingering on the dog before they walked back to a black SUV with its engine already running. That night, Shadow didn't sleep. He paced the floor, pausing at every window, his amber eyes reflecting the moonlight with a hypervigilance that mirrored Maya's own. "You're not just a dog, are you?" Maya asked, sitting on the floor beside him. "You're a witness." She reached for her phone and called the only person she still trusted, Mark Sullivan, an old colleague in internal security. "Mark, I need a deep dive on a restricted K9 tag," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Maya, stay away from that," Mark warned, his voice crackling with static. "That dog is on a black ops list. Private contractors. Someone wants him erased, and they don't care who's holding the leash." Maya looked at Shadow, who had rested his head on her boot. "He came to my door, Mark. He trusted me." "Then you're both targets," Mark replied before the line went dead. The next morning, Maya woke up to a silence that felt like a scream. Shadow was gone. No broken locks, no blood, no struggle, just an empty room and an untouched food bowl. "Shadow," she yelled, running out onto the sand. She spent 2 days driving the coastal roads, her heart in her throat as she questioned fishermen and locals. Most avoided her eyes, some whispered about a truck seen in the early hours. By the third night, she sat on her kitchen floor, clutching the dog's navy sweater in her hands, the guilt clawing at her chest. "I lost him," she whispered. "I failed again." The storm returned with a fury, wind howling across the black rocks. And then, beneath the roar of the ocean, she heard it, a soft, familiar scratching at the door. She threw the door open to find Shadow on the porch. He was thinner, streaked with dirt, and one of his legs was bleeding, but he was alive. He collapsed forward into her arms the moment she touched him. "You came back," she breathed, pulling him into the warmth. But as she cleaned his wounds, she realized something that made her blood run cold. Shadow hadn't just escaped, he had something tucked into his new collar, a small, encrypted microchip that didn't belong to any government agency. The dog hadn't been running for his life, he had been retrieving evidence. The cold air of the Pacific clung to the windows like a shroud as Maya Vance knelt on the kitchen floor, her fingers trembling against the wet, matted fur of the German Shepherd. Shadow's return wasn't just a miracle, it was a heavy, breathing accusation that the past she had tried to bury was now clawing its way back to her doorstep. She felt the jagged edge of the microchip tucked beneath his collar, a small piece of hardware that hummed with a dangerous secret. Shadow let out a low, pained whine, his amber eyes locking onto hers with a trust that felt like a physical weight on her chest. Maya realized then that he hadn't just escaped his captors, he had chosen to return to the only person who treated him like a living being rather than a restricted asset. "You didn't just run, did you, boy?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rattling of the wind against the wooden walls. Maya moved with a practiced, tactical efficiency, cleaning the blood from his leg while her mind raced through the implications of the chip. If the men in the black SUV realized what he had taken, her small house near the Black Rocks would no longer be a sanctuary. The mini-climax of the moment hit when she heard a low, metallic click from the porch, a sound that wasn't the wind or a branch, but the distinct cocking of a suppressed weapon. Maya didn't hesitate, throwing herself across the floor and dragging Shadow into the shadows of the hallway just as a silent round shattered the kitchen window. She felt the spray of glass against her skin, a sharp reminder that the time for hiding was over. She reached for her FBI field jacket, her fingers finding the familiar weight of her sidearm, feeling the armor of her profession settle over her shoulders once more. Shadow stood beside her, his body rigid, his ears twitching toward the back in trance with a hypervigilance that matched her own. "Stay low," she breathed, though she knew the dog understood the stakes better than any human partner she had ever had. The major twist arrived when her encrypted phone buzzed with a message from Mark Sullivan, but it wasn't a warning, it was a set of coordinates for a warehouse 3 miles up the coast. The message was followed by a video clip, Shadow, recorded on a grainy thermal camera, intentionally leading the contractors away from Maya's house 2 nights ago. He hadn't been taken, he had sacrificed his own safety to keep the search party away from her. The realization hit Maya like a physical blow, a surge of guilt and gratitude that threatened to break her composure. She looked at the dog, seeing the fresh blood on his bandage, and knew she couldn't wait for them to come back for a second attempt. She grabbed her tactical boots and laced them tight, the scuffed leather a testament to the miles she was about to put behind her. They moved through the back door and into the stinging rain, the ocean surging against the rocks as if demanding they leave before the land gave up its resistance. The pace intensified as they moved through the darkness of the coastal woods, Shadow navigating the terrain despite his limp with a predatory grace. Maya felt the adrenaline sharpening her senses, stripping away the months of leave-induced lethargy. She heard the distant rumble of an engine, the black SUV cruising the main road like a shark in shallow water. A hook of fear caught in her throat when she realized the microchip was emitting a faint, high-frequency ping, a tracker she hadn't disabled. "We're bait, Shadow," she muttered, her eyes scanning the dark treeline for any sign of movement. They reached the coordinates Mark had sent, an old cannery that smelled of salt and rotting wood. The profound twist came when she stepped inside and found not a sanctuary, but a command center filled with the same industrial equipment she had seen on Shadow's collar. On the screens were blueprints of a federal transport, the very operation she had been suspended for failing to protect. Shadow let out a low, guttural warning, his hackles rising as he stared at a figure standing in the center of the room. It was Sarah Whitman, the legal advisor who was supposed to be helping her with the custody ruling. Sarah didn't look like a lawyer now, she held a tablet that was synced to the chip in Shadow's collar, her expression analytical and cold. She told Maya that the dog was never meant to be a pet, that he was the primary data recorder for a project that blurred every ethical line the Bureau had ever drawn. "You should have let them take him, Maya," Sarah said, her voice echoing in the hollow warehouse. The dramatic tension surged as Shadow stepped in front of Maya, his teeth bared in a way she hadn't seen before, a silent promise of violence. Maya realized then that the contractors hadn't been looking for a lost dog, they were looking for the evidence of a deep-state betrayal that Sarah was orchestrating. The mini-climax of the standoff was interrupted by the sound of tires screeching on the gravel outside. The tall man with the blonde hair and the scarred jaw burst through the doors, but he didn't point his weapon at Maya, he pointed it at Sarah. He told Maya that he was the one who had released Shadow in the first place, an act of rebellion against a project that had turned his partner into a machine. He was the one who had erased the tag, trying to give the dog a chance to find a soul worth saving. "The chip is the only thing that keeps him alive," the man rasped, his eyes never leaving Sarah's tablet. Maya looked at Shadow, seeing the dog's posture ease as he recognized the man's voice, his original handler. The major twist was that the theft of the dog was actually a rescue, and the men at her door had been trying to protect Shadow from the erasure Sarah had planned. But the cliffhanger was far from over, as Sarah tapped a command on her screen, and Shadow let out a sharp cry of agony, his body collapsing as the chip began to overload his nervous system. Maya dropped to her knees, her hands grasping the collar, realizing that to save him, she would have to perform a field surgery she wasn't trained for, right as the warehouse was surrounded by a dozen more headlights. The ocean roared outside, a restless gray witness to the life-and-death struggle unfolding on the cold concrete floor. Maya looked into Shadow's fading amber eyes and made a silent promise that she wouldn't let him evaporate again. The scream of the Pacific wind against the cannery's corrugated metal walls was nothing compared to the raw, visceral sound of Shadow's agony. Maya Vance dropped to the oil-stained concrete, her FBI field jacket flaring out like a dark wing as she gathered the German Shepherd into her arms. Sarah Whitman stood over them, the glow from her tablet casting a ghoulish, analytical light over her features as she watched the high-frequency overload surge through the dog's nervous system. Maya's hands, usually steady from years of federal training, fumbled at the heavy industrial collar. She looked at the man with the scarred jaw, the handler who had tried to save this animal, and her voice was a serrated edge, demanding he do something. You released him to save him. Help me now. Maya yelled, her high cheekbones flushed with a mixture of rage and terror. The handler, whose lean frame was rigid with the anticipation of impact, didn't move toward her. He kept his weapon trained on Sarah. He told Maya that the chip was fused to the carotid artery, a failsafe designed to ensure the asset couldn't be reclaimed by anyone but the project's architects. If the signal wasn't cut, Shadow's heart would simply stop. The first mini-climax of the night shattered the warehouse's internal silence as Shadow's breathing faltered, a low, weak air passing through a throat that had no strength left to fight. Maya realized with a jolt of pure adrenaline that the law and the protocols she had lived by were useless here. She grabbed a pair of tactical shears from her belt, her storm cloud eyes narrowing as she calculated the risk. She told Sarah to shut down the tablet or she would personally ensure the legal advisor's analytical composure was permanently erased. Sarah only smiled, noting that the contractors were already at the perimeter and that Maya's career was already over. A major twist arrived when the warehouse bay door groaned open, but it wasn't the black SUV. It was Mark Sullivan, Maya's former colleague, flanked by a tactical unit that didn't belong to the Bureau. Mark didn't look at Sarah, he looked at Maya and told her she had been set up from the beginning. The coordinates he had sent weren't for a sanctuary, but for a kill box designed to consolidate all the restricted assets in one location for disposal. He had been compromised, his loyalty traded for a future he refused to imagine. Maya felt the weight in her chest double as she realized her only trust had been another trap. The cliffhanger of the moment hit when the handler fired a single, deafening shot, not at Sarah, but at the tablet in her hands, shattering the screen and momentarily breaking the frequency overload. Shadow gasped, his amber eyes fluttering open, reflecting a quiet, exhausted acceptance that broke Maya's heart. She didn't wait for a second chance. She used the shears to slice through the reinforced leather of the collar, ignoring the blood that streaked her hands. The mini-climax of the extraction was interrupted by the tactical team's first volley of tear gas, the canisters hissing across the floor like snakes. Maya pulled her Navy FBI jacket over Shadow's head, whispering for him to stay, to fight, to not let the darkness take him. The pace intensified as the warehouse became a maze of smoke and muzzle flashes. Maya felt her years of training strip away the panic, leaving only the cold, sharp focus of an agent who had already lost too much. She told the handler to lead them to the sea exit, the only way out that wasn't choked by the contractors. The profound twist came when they reached the pier and found the ocean quiet, a dull sheet of steel waiting to swallow them. But the black SUV wasn't on the road anymore, it was on the sand, its headlights sweeping the water like searching eyes. They aren't here for the dog anymore, Maya, Mark Sullivan yelled through the smoke, his understated suit now stained with the grime of a failed operation. They're here for you. You've seen the chip. You're the evidence now. The realization that her own life was the secondary target hit Maya with a force that felt almost personal. She looked at Shadow, who was trying to stand, his posture easing with each breath he took away from the frequency. He leaned his weight into her, a solid presence beneath the weakness, and she knew she couldn't let him be erased to save herself. A mini-climax erupted as the taller man with the blonde hair threw a smoke grenade toward the SUV, creating a 3-second window of visibility. Maya used it to scramble into a weathered boat tied at the edge of the rocks, dragging Shadow with her. She heard the shorter man's chuckle from the shore, a sound of easy compliance that made her skin crawl. He told her there was nowhere to go in Astoria during a winter storm. Maya didn't reply, she kicked the engine over, the hum of the boat's motor a desperate prayer in the darkness. The dramatic tension peaked as they pulled away from the pier, bullets hissing into the salt water behind them. Shadow sat in the bow, his ears twitching at the sound of the pursuit, his eyes fixed on the gray Pacific horizon. Maya looked back at the receding warehouse, seeing the lights of the bureau and the contractors merging into a single, restless blur. The major twist arrived when she realized the microchip wasn't just data, it was a digital key to the failed operation that had ruined her career. Shadow hadn't just retrieved evidence of trafficking, he had retrieved the proof of her innocence. But the hook of the night was the realization that the chip was still pinging, and a second boat was already cutting through the waves behind them. Maya looked at the dog, his amber eyes watching her with a trust that felt heavier than gratitude, and she realized the storm outside was no longer the worst thing. She had the evidence, she had the witness, but she was trapped on a dull sheet of steel with no backup and a dog who was bleeding through his navy sweater. She gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white, and told Shadow that they were going to make it to the Black Rocks or they would go down together. The mini-climax of the chase intensified as the pursuing boat drew closer, its bright beam of headlights sweeping over them. Maya saw Sarah Whitman standing at the bow of the second vessel, her straight blonde hair whipped into a frenzy by the wind. Sarah yelled that the custody was granted, not to Maya, but to the state. The profound cliffhanger ending this section was the sudden, sharp sound of a military-grade siren cutting through the ocean's roar, and a third set of lights appearing from the fog, too large for a contractor, too fast for the Coast Guard. Maya didn't know if it was help or a final authority coming to reclaim its property. Shadow let out a low warning sound, his body trembling beneath her palm as the gray Pacific sky seemed to close in around them. The roar of the unknown vessel's military-grade siren shattered the salt air, vibrating through the small boat's hull and Maya Vance's very bones. She gripped the steering wheel, her high cheekbones tight with a defiance that sleep could not fix. Beside her, Shadow, the K9 who had already lost too much, rose to his feet, his black and tan fur matted and heavy, his amber eyes locked on the approaching silhouette. Maya realized the frequency of the siren wasn't a warning, it was a tactical override signal. The first mini-climax of the chase erupted when her boat's engine sputtered and died, the electronic ignition seized by a remote kill switch she hadn't known existed. She looked at Sarah Whitman on the pursuing vessel and saw the legal advisor's composed, analytical expression break into a triumphant smile. "You can't run from a federal protocol, Maya." Sarah's voice projected over the water, cold and sharp. The dog was abandoned, and now he's being reclaimed by the final authority. Maya didn't reach for a weapon, the weight in her chest told her that steel was no match for the bureaucracy closing its jaws around them. She felt Shadow press his solid weight against her tactical pants, a silent surrender or perhaps a final stand. The dramatic tension surged as the massive third ship slowed, its searchlights blindingly white, revealing the insignia of a Black Ops internal security division. A profound twist hit when the large ship didn't deploy a boarding party for Maya, but instead fired a localized electromagnetic pulse toward Sarah's boat. The secondary vessel's lights went dark instantly, Sarah's scream of frustration swallowed by the Pacific's restless gray. Maya's heart stopped as a familiar figure appeared on the deck of the security ship, Mark Sullivan. He wasn't the colleague who had betrayed her earlier, he was wearing the reinforced tactical gear of a man who had finally chosen a side. He yelled for Maya to stay down, his loyalty hard-earned and finally visible. "The contractors violated every federal protocol, Maya." Mark shouted as the crane began to lower a rescue harness. "I'm not here to take him, I'm here to bring you both home." The mini-climax of the rescue was nearly derailed when the taller man with the blonde hair, the one with the scarred jaw, emerged from the shadows of Sarah's drifting boat. He aimed a specialized tranquilizer rifle not at Maya, but at Shadow, intending to erase the witness once and for all. Shadow let out a low warning sound, his hypervigilance returning as he shoved Maya toward the deck, shielding her with his own scarred flank. The pace intensified as the harness locked around Maya and the dog, lifting them into the freezing, salt-tasting air. Maya clung to Shadow's wet coat, the smell of oil and salt filling her lungs, her dark brown hair whipped into a frenzy by the sharp wind. She looked down and saw Sarah Whitman being restrained by her own team, the legal battle beginning before they even touched solid ground. A major twist arrived the moment they hit the deck of Mark's ship. Mark handed Maya an encrypted tablet showing that the failed operation she was blamed for had been a deliberate setup by the very contractors who had tried to reclaim Shadow. Shadow wasn't lost, Maya, he was the data recorder for the entire betrayal, Mark whispered, his eyes fixed on the German Shepherd. Every decision you made that came half a second too late was because they were jamming your comms from the inside. The realization that her failure was a manufactured lie hit Maya with the force of a tidal wave, stripping away months of Dan Vat and self-doubt. The mini-climax of her vindication was interrupted by Shadow collapsing, his strength finally failing as the adrenaline of the escape ebbed away. Maya dropped to her knees, her waterproof boots scuffed by the metal deck as she pulled the dog into her arms. She didn't ask the medics for a report, she looked at Shadow's steady, amber eyes and told him that he had found his way back, and this time, no one was going to erase his tag. The dramatic rhythm of the ship's engines felt like a pulse under her feet, a reminder that the world did not pause simply because they needed to breathe. A hook for the final hour arrived when Mark revealed that the microchip Shadow had retrieved was the primary evidence needed to dismantle the entire Black Ops training program. But the profound cliffhanger ending this section was a sudden communication over the ship's radio. A high-ranking official within the Bureau was demanding Maya be taken into custody for the theft of government property. Maya looked at the horizon, her sharp and composed face hardening into a mask of storm clouds. She realized that the storm outside was over, but the war for Shadow's life, and her own, was just entering its most dangerous phase. Shadow's tail thumped once against the deck in reply to her touch, a silent oath that they would stand their ground together. The static from the ship's radio hissed like a predator as the high-ranking official's voice demanded Emily Carter be taken into custody for the theft of government property. Emily stood on the metal deck, her Navy FBI field jacket soaked through, but her posture remained disciplined and rigid. She looked at Mark Sullivan, who was already adjusting the encryption settings on his tablet, his dark hair neatly trimmed despite the chaos of the salt-stained morning. Mark told Emily that they had less than 10 minutes before the Bureau's internal security intercepted their transmission, and the mini-climax of the standoff peaked when the ship's radar picked up two high-speed interceptors closing in from the north. Emily didn't reach for a weapon, she reached for Ranger, her fingers threading through his matted black and tan fur as he leaned his weight against her boot. "They aren't coming for the dog, Mark. They're coming to kill the evidence," Emily said, her storm cloud eyes narrowing with a focus that sleep could not fix. Mark nodded and revealed a profound twist. The microchip Ranger had retrieved didn't just contain tactical data, it held the private bank records of the very official who was currently demanding Emily's arrest. The cliffhanger of their legal survival hung on a thread as the first interceptor fired a warning shot across their bow, the spray of Pacific water drenching the deck. Emily realized that the only way to win this was to broadcast the data immediately, bypassing every federal protocol she had spent years defending. The pace intensified as Emily moved toward the communications array, Ranger following her every step, not out of fear, but by choice. She told Mark to link her phone to the ship's satellite uplink, her sharp face composed even as the interceptors drew closer. The mini-climax of the digital breach was interrupted when Sarah Whitman's voice broke through the emergency channel, her analytical tone now replaced by a desperate plea for a deal. Sarah offered Emily her career back, a full reinstatement, and a clean record if she would just hand over the German Shepherd and the chip. Emily looked at Ranger, who watched her with a trust that felt heavier than gratitude, and she told Sarah that some things didn't need an explanation, especially loyalty. A major twist shattered the negotiation when the interceptors suddenly broke formation, their pilots receiving a counterorder from an internal security legal advisor named Sarah Whitman. Sarah had realized the contractors had violated federal protocols and that the dog had been abandoned, changing the legal landscape entirely. The cliffhanger shifted from a physical battle to a legal one as the interceptors began to escort Mark's ship back to Astoria instead of sinking it. Emily felt the hypervigilance in her chest begin to ease, replaced by a steady, quiet resolve. The transition to the shore was methodically slow, the ocean unusually quiet beneath the fading winter light. Emily stood in her kitchen days later, cleaning Ranger's wounds with practiced hands while Sarah Whitman sat at the table, her blonde hair pulled into a low bun as she reviewed the final custody papers. Sarah told Emily that the ruling had come through quietly, permanent placement was approved, and there would be no appeals. The mini-climax of their official union was a simple thud of Ranger's tail against the floor, a sound that echoed louder than any storm Emily had ever faced. A profound twist emerged during their final meeting when Sarah revealed that the records surfaced during the investigation showed Ranger had been used beyond authorized parameters, his trauma labeled as instability to avoid liability. Emily felt a surge of protective fury, realizing that Ranger wasn't just a K-9, he was a survivor of the same system that had tried to break her. She told Sarah that she wouldn't just keep him, she was going to use the evidence to establish a rehabilitation initiative for other abandoned working dogs. The hook for their new future was the realization that Emily wasn't returning to the FBI to be the agent she was before, she was splitting her time to protect those the world had forgotten. The pace of the recovery was steady, Ranger regaining his weight and his posture easing with each sunrise. Mrs. Helen Brooks visited the house near the Black Rocks, leaning on her cane and watching as Ranger lay contentedly at Emily's feet. Helen told Emily that the dog had found his way back because love had become his direction. The mini-climax of the afternoon was Emily nodding in agreement, finally believing that the past no longer had the authority to chase them. The final profound twist of the story came when Mark Sullivan called to confirm that the high-ranking official had been indicted, the miracle of the rescue story reaching the highest levels of the Bureau. Emily stood on her porch as the sun dipped into the Pacific, her Navy FBI jacket discarded, her hand resting on Ranger's head. She whispered to him that he was finally home, and the German shepherd's tail thumped once in a reply that required no further evidence. Emily realized that she hadn't found peace by escaping her past, but by standing still long enough to let grace find her. In the end, Emily Carter understood that not everything we are asked to protect is easy, and not everything we are asked to love is safe. She looked out at the waves crashing against the rocks, no longer feeling the need to armor herself against the world. Ranger sat beside her, grounded and calm, a living testament that what feels lost may still find its way home. Some bonds are not written in contracts or engraved on metal collars, they are forged in the storm and anchored by the choice to never let go.